Hi there, I'm Neil Benyon, and this is episode 1 of the Wandering Desk podcast, the podcast about travel, productivity, and general mucking about. It's actually really, if anything, a podcast about the life abroad, about going to live somewhere that isn't your original home and making a life out there, whether it's in the short term, like a digital nomad, and where you're staying for 1 or 2 or 3 months, or longer term where you're sort of more part of the community and you really have to adapt to the culture and the local way of doing things. This first episode is entitled Pandora's Backpack, and we'll go into why that is. So my humble beginnings were as I worked in IT. I was a software developer for a large corporation and getting paid very nicely for it. Thank you very much. Getting frequent promotions, even without having to try. I just have an appraisal every 6 months or a year, and they'd say, okay, well, now you're a Lord Emperor software developer or whatever else, push you up another level. Here's some more money. Which was nice, and I had a very nice life living in London, and really, I suppose doing okay in career terms, but not ultimately satisfied. And after 5 years of doing that, I decided to leave and to go on a journey, not around the world, but through the Americas. So I left and went on this big journey from New York down to Buenos Aires in Argentina over a period of about 10 and a half months. It was a huge deal for me at the time. It really was, actually, leaving a job after 5 years. As you get older, 5 years seems smaller and smaller. And obviously it is. It's a small proportion of your life in general. But at the time, 5 years, it felt like, although I'd been paid well, it felt like really, in many ways, they felt like wasted years, because I felt like I knew that this wasn't contributing to any sense of life meaning. In fact, actually, straight out of uni, I was, and into this job, I very quickly found myself thinking, well, is this it? Just blinkers on, heads down, and then just run to the finish line, which is retirement. I mean, it just seems so ultimately unfulfilling. And very early on, I found myself despairing at this traditional path laid out ahead of me. And then going on this journey was, in a way, I don't know if it was a break from that, but in a way, I didn't know what lay beyond it, really. And it really was a watershed moment. And when I look back at it, one of the greatest times I've had in my life, a period of phenomenal growth and learning and self-awareness. And I think anyone who's done that, anyone who's gone away on a trip like that, well, if you go away on a big life-changing trip and yet there is no life-changing element to it, then arguably you're doing it wrong. I learned so much about myself. I learned about suddenly nothing. No, okay, no, I was wrong. In fact, no, I learned so much about myself. I learned about really the sound of my own voice, in a way, my own internal voice. I developed an ability to be on my own, and I've always been pretty self-sufficient, but it went to a new level again. I learned about myself in terms of knowing that 2 to 3 days on my own is a good period of time. And after that, I start talking out loud to myself. And about 5 days with other people is a good period of time to spend with other people before needing time again. So time to myself again. So I developed an understanding and self-awareness of that kind of rhythm of what I actually needed myself. And saw something of the amazing beauty of the world, natural beauty of the world, and developed an understanding of history and culture of other countries, which I must say I found far more interesting than my own country. I found the history of that quite stuffy, but something about Latin America especially, which is the countries in North and South America where they speak Romance languages, mostly Spanish, also Portuguese. There's something more digestible and exciting about that history, and maybe because it's so easily split up into parts, basically pre the arrival of Christopher Columbus and post his arrival as well. Maybe even 3 parts, because the many countries that gained their independence from the Spanish in the early part of the 19th century. That's another sort of marker stone. And I faced up to many fears. In fact, I think it's something that a lot of people do when they go away. They try things they'd never even thought they would try, and that was certainly the case with me. I had a long-standing fear of being in deep water, despite the fact that I could swim, albeit only at a fairly rudimentary level. But I never liked being in water where I couldn't either put my feet on the bottom or I couldn't grab something. And I went there and I learned to dive, and learning to do that, and like the start of which is really learning how to snorkel. So you don't have any of the equipment. There's just you and a face mask and a snorkel, and learning to be comfortable in that sort of water where there's nothing below you for 10, 12, 15 meters, 20 meters. That was a revelation for me. And then also to back it up, then to go away. I did that in the Bay Islands of Honduras. Well, not on the islands, obviously in the water by the islands, and then to go into the Galapagos and just jump off a boat into open water and feel so utterly comfortable doing this. And you have this sense of progression and having faced up to a fear, and it's a very freeing and very optimistic time. The reason why this episode is called Pandora's Backpack is because after that amazing revelatory period, I went back to the UK and experienced what a lot of people do, which is that sort of reverse culture shock. Now, culture shock when you go out somewhere, I don't know really that I get it now anymore, but I certainly got it then. It's a tough thing to go through, but you do acclimatize. But that was sort of reverse culture shock. For me, if anything, coming back, I was extremely optimistic coming back, and I had ideas in my mind about all the things I wanted to do. I was going to learn Swahili whilst snowboarding and whatever else. And at the same time, strange coming back and seeing that I'd lived the last 10 and a half months out of a backpack. Now, I was a profound overpacker at that point. I took all sorts of nonsense with me that I didn't need. And I think, again, that's a common story. People tend to, as they go on successive trips, they take less and less, because it's a pain to carry all this stuff around and then think, why do I have Larousse's Gastronomique or whatever it is? Why do I have the Oxford 2 volumes of the Oxford Shorter Dictionary in my bag, and I'm not really using them every day? And so you tend to pack lighter as time goes on, but still coming back and seeing people around with all these things that you've since realized are so unnecessary to life. And people, again, reinforcing this idea, people are in this sort of headlong rush. People are going from like car to car to car, people bigger and bigger houses, and filling them with stuff. All this stuff which suddenly seems unnecessary. And after that period, but there are nice things as well, I think, when you come back. I think when you come back, especially when you come back to a house and you're walking around barefoot in deep pile carpets, it's great. And being able to actually have a proper bath as well, when you're being used to sort of very rudimentary showers on your sort of in your budget accommodation day after day. So that was nice. But I found that over a period of time, I never really re-acclimatized fully. And I really did try. I spent about, after that year away, so after 5 years, and I finally broke free, and I did this nearly a year-long trip through the Americas. And then on coming back, I spent 4 years really trying to reacclimatize, trying to make a life for myself back there, and never really feeling like a part of the country again. And this is what I'm alluding to when I talk about Pandora's backpack, which is that you've opened Pandora's box. I know it's a cliche, but you've seen something. Your world has expanded. What's that Einstein quote? Not the one about insanity being wearing the same suit every day, or whatever it is. The one about how your mind, once your mind has expanded, it never regains its original proportions. I don't know. Is it Einstein? I thought it was Einstein, but it seems like more and more nowadays I find that quotes have been misattributed. So maybe it was Jeff Goldblum. I have no idea. But what I found was that having done that, having seen that, having experienced life, having experienced that kind of adventure, life back in the UK just seemed even more banal than it had done before I'd gone away. Now, I do think there is something in this about the kind of person that I am. I suspect that there is a type of person that just needs the life less ordinary, can't really, just does the banal badly. I think we all do to some extent. I think we this is why we have this sort of aphorism about a change being as good as a rest. We all feel energized by change, even if sometimes change can be stressful and challenging. But at the same time, there's something specific about me, and I do think there are plenty of other people out there who feel the same way, who life's missing something, and then they go away on a big trip and they go, wow, this is amazing, it's the best thing that they've ever done. And then how do you reacclimatize back? You can't just spend your whole time reminiscing, looking in the rearview mirror. So what do you do then? And for me, well, at first I went away again on further trips. And to be honest, the magic wasn't there in the same way as it was with the first trip. I think the first trip is the greatest because that's when you do all the learning. The second trip, you're going to have to do something different. The second trip was great in its own way. The first trip I drove across the US with some friends and then took public transport down through Mexico and Central America, and all this sort of hassle of getting on buses and you don't know what you're doing at all, and there are risks because you've got to be careful you don't get your stuff stolen, and you're just working it all out for the first time. How to meet people, a real sort of issue for me at first. I was just walking around on my own going, God, I don't know anyone here. I don't know how to talk to people, and not really realizing that actually if there are other people doing the same thing, you can just go up and say hi. I've heard all sorts of really complicated things about, well, go up and ask this question, that question. No, generally speaking, especially if you're the more fish out of water situation that you're in, God, I'm really racking up the cliches today, but the more fish out of water situation that you're in, I'll just repeat it, I think the more camaraderie you feel with other people doing the same thing, and the more you can just go, hi, and that was certainly the case with me. I remember being in a little hostel or guest house rather, in Guatemala. I came out of my room where I was kind of going a little bit crazy, came out, and there were a couple of Aussies walking up there, and I just said, hi, and they were like, I'm not even going to do the accent because I'll just mangle it. But they were like, all right, mate, yeah, do you want to go for a beer? I'm just like, yeah, okay. I was like, wow, that was easy. So all that learning was done on that first trip. And the second trip, which itself was great, and let's be clear about this, I did really enjoy it and I did get a lot out of it, which was taking successive trains across Europe all the way essentially to the border with Vietnam. I took the Eurostar to Belgium, changed to a Thalys across to Cologne, took the 2-day train or whatever it is through Germany and Poland and Belarus to Moscow, and then the Trans-Siberian across Moscow down into Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. I spent time in Mongolia. I mean, what a trip, journey of a lifetime in many ways. But having done it all before, there wasn't all that, although the activities themselves were different. I think by the time I reached Vietnam and I was just back into this thing of, go to the place and see the thing and whatever else, it wasn't really it feels a little bit superficial. And in fact, what I've found is my trips have become more and more profound. But also, I have a need to be more engaged with the place. It's not enough to go to a place now and look at the cathedral. I want to spend significant time abroad. And in fact, that's what I've ended up doing. I've ended up living abroad. Several years in Poland, for instance. I've lived in Laos. You see, yeah. How long? At what point do you say lived? I think digital nomads are always making this a smaller and smaller length of time. Oh yeah. I lived in Chiang Mai for a week. No, you didn't. Far be it for me to be prescriptive about language, but I don't think lived is a week. I've never heard anyone say that. I'm just kind of railing against something now that doesn't even exist. But I don't think a month is necessarily enough. But I spent 5 months in Laos, for instance, Laos. I spent 7 months in Spain. I spent significant time in Colombia, although I was traveling around, and more recently, as I said, in Poland. And I have actually, again, I've tried going back, and I really struggle to acclimatize to life back home. I don't think it'll always be the case. I do think that what you need out of life changes as you get older and as your life situation changes. I mean, at some point in everyone's life, for instance, healthcare becomes more important. And at some point, people just get tired of moving around. And I think even in this stage of my life now, there's a right amount of balance. The superficial, that sort of bombing around everywhere, that doesn't suit me at all now. I can't deal with that. And I find it's just it doesn't meet my needs. And what I need is, I do need change, but I also need a sense of belonging, and I need things to be interesting and different. And well, I've thought about this. I was going to say challenging, but it's not just because life's harder that it makes it more fun. I mean, you can make life challenging by just super gluing everything in your flat down, wouldn't you? That would make life challenging, and it wouldn't actually make life more enjoyable necessarily, or make you feel like you're living it to the full. So I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but I think a sense of community is really important. Enough change to keep you feeling energized and revitalized. Because just, for instance, living abroad, I spent some time living in the beautiful city of Wrocław in southwest Poland, which is the one spelled, it looks like Rocklaw with a W at the start. I'm surprised anyone ever makes a plane for that, to be honest, because, if they're saying like last call for Wrocław, everyone's going to be like, well, at least the Rocklaw plane still hasn't finished boarding yet. But after some time there, actually my initial time there, every time I'd walk into the Rynek, which is the main square, the heart of the city, I feel like either physically or mentally kind of holding my arms up, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this place, I'm so blessed to be living in this place, at risk of sounding like somebody's Facebook status update. But after about, after a couple of years or so somewhere, then I find anyway, for me, the limit is, it's a couple of years somewhere. I do find myself, I kind of lose my mojo. You end up, or certainly I do, feeling a bit like the sort of the tourist donkey that you can take a ride on. That it's so used to it's followed the same path so many times that it's on rails. And if you wanted to go a different way, then good luck with that. And I feel like your life can end up a bit like that. And maybe you can solve it in the short term by moving to a different part of the city and sort of changing your routines and saying, I'm not going to go to those cafes anymore. But you need a big enough city to be able to do that. So I think enough change to keep you energized, but enough stability to feel like you're part of a community. And I think we all need that. And one thing that I notice that comes up a lot with digital nomads is think I get a pick up from a lot of people saying it in those words, or sometimes in different terms. But you're reading between the lines. That's what people are missing, is that they're missing that sense of community. So I think there is a challenge there as well. But once you spent time abroad, it really is hard to go back because of that whole notion of as I said, Pandora's backpack. For me, summed up by this idea of after coming back from that trip through the Americas, re-acclimatising to life and going shopping, using this day pack that I'd gone up Machu Picchu with me, and I'd been up volcanoes with, been to the Galapagos Islands with, all around Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, all these places, and now you're putting tins of food in there, and occasionally making some food that you had on the trip or something like that, or reminiscing, or even going to some kind of like a Cuban night or something like that, like kind of Latin night, and it all feels like a really pale simulacrum of what you actually experienced when you were out there. In many ways, it actually makes it worse, I think, when you try to do these things. I mean, it's one thing to go back over your photos and reminisce, but actually trying to relive it again through these sort of, like I was saying, Latin nights, whatever, it just feels like a poor representation of something that you've actually done for real. And of course, you can't really share these things with other people either. I found that people that have done it get it, and people who have lived abroad get it. But a lot of people are really bored by all your chatter, especially backpacker chatter, to be honest. And more people seem to be doing it now. Certainly, I just think more and more people are doing it. I guess costs have come down, and it's not even... People share photos on Facebook, and it makes other people think, well, that person, I'm like that person, and they've gone to Bolivia. Well, I can do that as well. So I suspect that's changed, although I don't have the stats to hand of how exactly it's changed. But certainly people who haven't done that, when you're talking about climbing a volcano in Guatemala or something, they kind of it's just like, no, mate, I can't relate to you. You know, I was in Halfords the other day. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's just kind of, it sounds really self-indulgent, and perhaps it is, but I do actually, at the same time, I feel a lot of envy for the people who haven't done that. I wouldn't undo it. I would not do it another way. But at the same time, there are people who don't need to do what I do to feel happy and satisfied in life and to have a rich, deep and meaningful life. They have, they've got a family. They have their sense of community back home, wherever they are. They've worked hard to provide their family with security and to get away and have a holiday however many times a year, and they're very happy doing that. And you do have to look at that and say, well, which person has got it right? And certainly I wonder what someone like me would have done in Middle Ages. Maybe I'd be the guy going to the next village. Oh, you've been to the other village, aren't they? Oh, those people are savages. Or maybe not, I don't know. But certainly I feel like there is an element to it which is a curse. It seems odd to describe something which is so privileged to be able to travel around, because plenty of places you go to and you say, people say to you, locals will say to you, what are you doing here? I had this in parts of Colombia, and it's not like Colombians don't leave their own country or something, but I did experience people in a few far-flung places where they struggled to grasp the idea that I was just traveling around Colombia for pleasure, essentially learning how to dance, in fact, but that this was a thing that you could do. Why would you do that? So it is immensely privileged. So to call it a curse seems in its own way kind of arrogant and disrespectful of the people who can't do it. But at the same time, it is something that something's been gained and something's been lost as well. But oh boy, the stuff you gain is great. I mean, I really, the time that I've spent abroad learning about other countries, living in different ways, to trying to acclimatize to new cultures with varying degrees of success. It's been amazing, and I wouldn't change that for anything. Very lucky, essentially, to have been born into a position to be able to do that. And something as well I think it gives you is tremendous insights into yourself and into your own culture, into your own people. I think I understand the British, and especially the English, better than I ever have done. And that's really come from being abroad. And when you're trying to understand other people's behavior, because when you're in another country and people behave in a certain way, and sometimes it can seem disrespectful to you, but that's because you're applying. It can be because the person is an asshole, basically. That can be what it is. But you're always making this sort of internal thing, this internal judgment, that when someone behaves in a way that bothers you, they jump in the queue, or they let a door go in your face or something like that, and you're thinking, is this personality or is this culture? And when you see repeated patterns and you realize this is culture, and you realize that there's no meaning intended when the person let the door go in your face, they weren't being rude. It might be profoundly rude back in England, for instance, but to apply that meaning in another country, especially say in Central or Eastern Europe, that's the wrong meaning. That is not what was meant by that. They were not abdicating their responsibilities in any way. And it's you that's got to change. And then through that process, you realize as well, what the values of your own people are. I read a really excellent book by Katie Fox, the cultural or social anthropologist. She wrote a book called Watching the English, and she talks about this. And that was very instructive as well, hearing about how basically the core foundations of Englishness it's this notion of fair play, and it really guides everything. It's this is why we queue in the way we do. This is why when you're at the bar, if you're English, you'll relate to this. If you're not, maybe not so much. But when you're at the bar, if someone who's arrived after you gets served before you, you feel a profound sense of injustice, and you're thinking this person's a jerk. But I don't know why you're thinking in American pejoratives now. But similarly, if you've arrived second and the barman doesn't realize and gets it wrong and goes to serve you first, you're not going to allow that to happen. You're going to say, no, this person's before me. You feel terrible guilt, and you just feel like you're being a bad person, essentially, if you allow that to continue, because of this underlying rule of fair play. And in fact, when you look at many British behaviours, you can see fair play underlying it. I said British instead of English, but I suspect it's actually really common to most of the UK. And so that's been really good in helping me to understand myself and the values that are dear to me, and where those values come from as well. Because even after years living in Poland, I still find it where someone will do something that is perfectly normal for Poland, and there's no meaning there, and I have to stop myself applying the wrong meaning to it, because it's easy to get upset by behavior of others that you can apply the meaning of disrespect to, when that's not the meaning at all. So I think in that sense, it's there's a lot of growth and self-learning, and just generally just life abroad in general. I think exploring different food, you get to see all sorts of amazing different places. If you spend time in another country, you spend significant time there, then you're probably going to explore the environs as well and see all the wonderful natural and man-made beauty of the place. It's a tremendously expensive geography lesson as well, but probably the most effective geography lesson you can have is to go to a place. It's once you've been to a place and you've traveled around, you're not going to forget the capital city, and you've got a really strong sense of the lay of the land, shall we say. but I think maybe some other element as well is my dear departed grandfather once said to me that, like, when you've been, to paraphrase, when you've been shot at by the Germans, then going to, picking up milk from the supermarket, it seems really tame. And he's, I don't think necessarily going backpacking or living in a foreign country is exactly analogous to participating in global warfare and being on the, being shot at as you try to get it, as you race from your stricken tank, which is what he was doing, to get into another nearby Allied tank to escape whilst being shot at. I don't necessarily think that's exactly analogous to like doing shots in some bar in Cusco, but at the same time there is something there which I think is, when you've lived sort of an adventurous kind of life, it really is hard to sort of tone it down a couple of steps. And hence, exactly, again, as I say, it's Pandora's backpack. Well, that's the life I've chosen. Maybe that's the life that you've chosen, in which case I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff for you, hopefully, in future podcasts. It won't mostly just be me. Sometimes they'll have these rambling monologues, but I will be having some other guests on as well to inspire and enlighten you. And what can I say? I don't know. How do you finish a podcast? We're done. Yeah, something like that. So yeah, Pandora's backpack. Very interested to hear if you've had similar experiences. And if there's anything from here that requires a link, then you'll find that in the show notes. But that's it from me. Thanks for listening. And I'll look forward to you listening again, even though I don't know if you're actually doing it. So yeah, cheers, take care, good luck, see you in episode 2. Bye.